Hello, everyone. We are back. It's Chasing Green Arrows turns into Chasing the Transfer. We're ready to go for a transfer season. I'm joined by a VIP of the transfer game. It's Graeme Bailey. How you doing, mate?
I'm good, thanks, mate. You?
Yeah, I'm good. I mean, for those on here that recognise me but don't recognise Graeme, Graeme is, he's been around this game probably a little bit longer than me just because he's a little bit older than me. But he's a very much in the know. Mate, this is normally just an FPL show, but we've transformed it for this little season to get, especially for this one, your Newcastle insight. Today we are going to get things up and running with a show focused on Newcastle. They've obviously got hundreds of players being linked to them throughout the summer. Everyone, we're just going to spend an hour getting into the rumours, telling you what you can and can't and shouldn't rather believe. As I say, Graeme is a transfer specialist. Formerly, it was just known as a football journalist, wasn't it, mate? We've had to change the way that our titles work.
Yeah, transfer correspondent and everything. Now it's good for us. Yeah, we're in a little bit of a plateau, aren't we? A little bit of a niche.
Yeah, I think so. Get your questions in throughout the show. I'll address some of them as we're going, but others we will save till the end. So if your question isn't answered, we're on a specific topic, don't worry. I'm going to try and come back to them all at the back end of the show. Graeme, just to give everyone an idea, I mean, you live in the Northeast, or you're from the Northeast. You're living up that way. Tell everyone what your background is, and I mean, you've been covering Newcastle for longer than some of these viewers have probably been alive.
Yeah, unfortunately, quite a long time. I'm from Teesside, Middlesbrough fan, but I cover the whole of the Northeast, all of North England, really. Every club really, but yeah, Newcastle they've been good to me the last year or so. They're doing very good to me. I think they'll continue to be. I think I said to you off there's no club had more players linked to them this off season than Newcastle, and for good reason. They are the richest club in the Premier League, which is saying something. And they are going, no matter what they say, they are going to be spending some of that this summer. I think they're trying to make out FFP will handcuff them a little bit. But I'm not sure many of us are buying that, especially the clubs who are selling them these players, which I think a lot of these messages are aimed at.
Yeah, exactly that. The first one's in already, Maguire to Newcastle. I'll address that in a minute, Indian football coach. Good to see you here. And so many of our chasers that are usually just here for the FPL stuff. And Daniel, I see, is already asking about FFP. There you go. That took 7 minutes, not even that, for the old FFP to come in. 3 minutes, actually. It's 7 minutes past. We started late. We've got loads coming up today. We're going to do a section called Fresh Off the Press, where we'll address the live rumours, mainly from Newcastle. But if there's anything like you really want addressing that isn't Newcastle, I'm sure we can creep one or two in as well. And then we're going to do a source meter later on in the show where there's some big names. If you've come here to find out if Neymar might join Newcastle, that's the part that you need to be around for. And all I'll say is that while some people have poured cold water all over that story for a long time, I'm not quite in that camp. I don't think it will happen, but stay tuned because it's not a non-runner, is it, mate?
No, not at all. Let's not forget where this all stems from. It stems from the fact that PIF are 80% owners of Newcastle. They're not a minority. They own 80% of Newcastle, and I think the exciting thing for Newcastle fans is you can see what they're already doing in Saudi Arabia, Dean. They really are putting their money where their mouth is with Karim Benzema going there and N'Golo Kante. So yeah, and let's not beat around the bush. PIF want Newcastle to be Premier League champions, and they're going to do whatever it needs to make them Premier League champions.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually interesting. I mean, Aston Villa Bozzy has just come into with a question that I think we were chatting the other day, and we actually spoke about this. He says, with the owners of Newcastle buying into several Saudi clubs, will they try and bend rules to get some players in on loan? And this is definitely we think of the Red Bull clubs, obviously the Man City group, the City group, and the clubs that they own. This isn't completely uncharted territory, but it is a little different, isn't it?
It is, because with the City group and Newcastle going down this avenue as well, you have a feeder club where we'll talk about one of their new signings, Min-jae, who's going out on loan, who's just arrived at Newcastle. That's a different thing where you have feeder clubs where you're sending all these players out there, like Chelsea used to have Vitesse Arnhem. In theory, these Saudi clubs are level with Newcastle. They're almost like sister clubs rather than feeder clubs. So it's a bit like Udinese in Watford, maybe, where you do see quite a few of the crossovers. Probably the most in Europe, I would say, between them two, don't we? We see the crossover. And so I wouldn't rule it out. And I do know that this has been looked at by not just Newcastle, but other clubs as well. Can we loan players back in there? So I wouldn't dismiss it out of hand.
Yeah, exactly that. Ash says, Graham, what's the latest on Bas Dost to Newcastle?
Yeah, forever linked. Yeah, I think fortunately, Newcastle fans have moved on from Bas Dost now. He was a perennial link to Newcastle. Yeah, but I think someone like Moussa Diaby is probably the new Bas Dost.
Do you reckon? Yeah, I was going to say,
Hugo Ekiteke, one of our own personal favourites, Dean.
Oh, Ekiteke. I mean, we got a few windows out of that one, didn't we? I mean, that was a favourite of yours. I mean, how many stories do you reckon you wrote on Ekiteke?
Oh yeah, it was quite a few. It was at least a dozen, wasn't it, in that window?
Yeah, it was a pretty mad one. Here's a bit of a vague Newcastle one before we move on to a fresh off the press, where we will be addressing a load of rumours that are around right now. And Mark says, Graham, whoever they sign, do you agree that Bruno needs to play further forward as a 10?
Good question, Mark. I don't really. I think he's really great in that quarterback role. I think they want someone with, and we'll discuss it. I think they want someone with energy next to him, someone big, to take a bit of the workload off him, so they can get him forward. Because I think Bruno's capable of breaking teams down. I don't think they want him as a 10 because, as we'll discuss as well, Dean, the links we can see, they do want a number 10. I think they see Bruno more as a number 8. In between, and then they want someone else who can be the 6, who can be the sitter. But I wouldn't change him too much. For me, Dean, as you know, I'm a huge fan of Bruno. He's one of the best midfielders in the Premier League. He'll get a new contract at Newcastle. But no, I can see why he'd say that because he's capable of playing there, but I'd have him as the 8.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, stay with us, everyone. We are going to be moving on now to our first main section of this show, which is called Fresh Off the Press. Okay, yeah. So in this section, you can ask other questions. If you don't necessarily have a connection to Newcastle, then feel free to ask other stuff. I'm not going to answer all of them. I can tell you that, but I might throw in the odd nugget. Let's start with Newcastle, though, mate. Before we actually address the rumours, someone talked about this at the start. I couldn't see exactly who brought up the comment, but I think somebody said something about Eddie Howe addressing Neymar's ego. And I think that one of the things we should probably put out there is it's not really in Eddie Howe's nature to even want a massive summer window, is it, where they're throwing hundreds of £1 million and stupid contracts at people? Are you expecting them to keep their feet on the floor a little bit here?
It's a tough one because it's about expectation levels, Dean, where Eddie Howe doesn't want to build them up too much because, otherwise he's got his own future to worry about. And we're not suggesting for 1 second that Eddie Howe's job will be in trouble, but this is a team now who have PIF as the owners. Their minimum expectation now for Newcastle is Champions League football every year. So it's fourth until it changes, doesn't it, next year or the year after to top 5. But it's a top 4 minimum now for Newcastle.
Yeah.
He has overachieved this season. He has, fair play to him. But and we do have to. It's very simple to do, but you do relate it to Man City and the path they went on, where it's not going to be long before Newcastle are getting linked to Jose, to Zidane, to Pep when he leaves. It's going to happen. It's just a natural progression, isn't it? Where we're not saying Eddie Howe isn't world class, but is he in that top trench of managers? Not quite yet. He might be able to, and he'll be given the chance to do it. But if Newcastle are struggling, if you're not in the top 4 at Christmas, there'll be questions being asked by PIF because, they do like Eddie Howe, but they're putting their money in, as we said at the start of the show, to win the Premier League, Dean, and that's what counts for them, really.
Yeah, absolutely. The only transfer that everyone seems to be really interested in on this feed seems to be Maguire to Newcastle. So we'll start there. What do you reckon, mate? I mean, I'll let you start talking about this one, and I'll lead it on.
There is an interest there. Newcastle would take him. I think at some point United would have done a loan, but we're talking about one of their rivals now, when they were being linked to him last summer. Newcastle weren't particularly a Man United rival. They are now. And the thing with Harry Maguire, I did a piece this week. It's where he's currently sat at United, not wanting to move. So his agents want him to go to Italy. They think he'd be good in Serie A. They've got Juventus into AC looking at him. United have got a bit of interest in the Premier League from likes of West Ham, Newcastle. There's teams who want to take him, Dean, but he doesn't particularly want to move, and that's impacted on United a little bit because do they push ahead? Obviously, interested in Kim and Desai at Monaco. Do they push ahead with these and then be risk having a guy on nearly £200,000 a week sat in the stand? It's a huge risk on United's part, and yeah, but Newcastle do want this right-sided centre half, Dean, and they've got this decision to make as well. Newcastle, do they bring a young defender in, maybe someone like a Bella Kotchup at Southampton who could replace Fabian Schär 6 months down the line, or do they bring in someone like that, Maguire, who would start next to Sven Botman? They've got that decision to make as well.
Yeah, absolutely that. I mean, with Harry Maguire, you look at some of the other clubs that are linked. Tottenham, there's definitely an interest there. We have to see whether they actually kick on with it. I saw Aston Villa.
Your boy's Fulham, I think, Dean. Maguire could do a lot worse than Harry Maguire.
Look, I would take Harry Maguire at Fulham, and I mentioned this at the end of last season to a few of the people sat around me at Fulham, and they couldn't believe what I was saying and were like going crazy about it. I'm like, what? Hang on. You guys are like saying you don't want Harry Maguire. He's a regular England international who plays for Man United, and you wouldn't take him at Fulham. Like, you need to reassess what you're talking about here, because this is you're literally going off how he's been perceived on Twitter. Harry Maguire is still a very good footballer, and honestly, I don't think Fulham would even be able to get in that conversation. I shouldn't imagine they shouldn't be able to, because there should be European clubs who want to get hold of him.
Yeah, definitely. And no, from what I'm hearing, his agents would like him to go to Serie A. I think he'd be great over there, Dean. I think I'd suit him down to the ground. We've seen Chris Smalling go over there, Tomori as well. And yeah, I think he'd be great over there, but it's going to be down to Harry himself. He's got a few years left on his contract. And as we've seen, as Chelsea will probably sample this summer, just because you want a player to leave, it's not always easy just getting them out the door.
Yeah, exactly that. And look, Man United wouldn't loan Harry Maguire to Newcastle. That's absolutely no sense in them doing that. You think back to when the takeover first went through, there was almost a pact between some owners not to do loan deals with Newcastle because it was just not beneficial. They were going to harm themselves by helping Newcastle get up the ladder. So if anyone wants Harry Maguire, who a rival like Newcastle now are, as you say, they're going to have to pay for him. Whereas there might be other clubs where they do look to do a loan, right? I just saw somebody, Ash, says, "Is Dominik Szoboszlai to Newcastle a mere fantasy?" And Big Tips follows it up and says, "Yes, Szoboszlai is a superstar." Look, I've been waiting a few years now for Szoboszlai to land in the Premier League. He's taken a different path, perhaps to the one I thought he might go down. But he's not going to stay in the RB model for his life. And Newcastle does seem like the kind of club that would be perfect for him to step into, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. And they have looked at him, Dean. As we said before, we talked about Bruno, they need a number 10. They're looking at a number 10. We'll obviously touch on James Maddison in a bit. But Szoboszlai is a consideration for them. He is. And the problem with him is that he's got a huge release clause, isn't he? It's 17 million. I think it's only for a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And the problem with RB Leipzig is just they do need to sell probably one a window to keep their model going, but that's likely to be Vardiol this summer. Man City hunting him. So if he does go, there's not a massive need for them to sell Szoboszlai. They've kept Olmo as well. Yeah. It's one to keep an eye on for sure for Newcastle. I think if they don't get James Maddison, they may pursue it. But if they don't get Maddison for whatever reason, we'll discuss in a bit, I don't see them being able to do Szoboszlai because he's not cheap.
Yeah, no, he's not cheap. I mean, Steve throws in the question, is the budget the reported £75 million? I mean, I expect Fulham to go and spend more than £75 million this summer. So why would Newcastle, at a moment when they've just made the Champions League and have leapfrogged about 5-6 clubs, limit their spending at £75 million? That doesn't make any sense to me.
No, and they've just signed a big new shirt sponsor with a Saudi Arabian-based tourism company. Makes them one of the biggest in the Premier League as well, Dean. They've got sold out season tickets. They haven't got an awful lot of... They took over without debt from Mike Ashley. There's no huge deals left to pay off. They bought Isak for that 75 million last summer, and they're in a better position now. Sorry, but I'm not buying it. Newcastle sending out these stories. I think Newcastle will easily, Dean, spend over $250 million this summer. I really do. I don't see them not. They've already briefed that they want a left-sided forward, a number 10, and another centre midfielder, a left back, and a centre half. That's 5 players that club are briefing. Where are you getting them from? League Two? It's not going to happen. So I think they're just being a bit hesitant, but. They don't owe a lot of money, Newcastle. I don't see there being a massive issue with financial fair play. As long as you get the players on deals that you can pay over a certain period. So it's always like if he was 17, you have to pay his release clause. That would be an issue with FFP. It would. A 70 million hit for any club at the moment is hard on FFP. But I think there'd be a way around that. No, I don't think it'll be 75 million. As you said, they'll probably spend that on one player.
Exactly that. I mean, I just don't see if they were to only spend £75 million back, then the only thing they're doing is holding themselves back in a moment like this Newcastle. And it just doesn't make any sense. They've got an opportunity here to get forward, and we've seen that PIF they wouldn't limit themselves like that. Like Eddie Howe actually might not mind if they only spent £75 million because it might limit expectation. But this is a club that doesn't want to do that.
They want to win the Premier League, and they're giving what £220 billion to the Saudi Pro League, and they've already put the money where the mouth is. That's ongoing, and Newcastle are going to get the same backing. They really are.
A few people are asking about Osimhen in the chat, so I'll address that now. I mean, I think that's probably beyond reach. You're talking in pounds, upwards of £100 million for him, and more than that. Like if Osimhen's going to leave Napoli, I personally think that if he was given the green light to do that, then he'd probably get a Chelsea or a Man United coming in to get him ahead of a Newcastle. But have you had any indications at all that Osimhen would be attainable or in their vision?
They have looked at Napoli, Cavaradonna, as he's better known in the Northeast because we can't say his name properly. He's more one they have looked at quite intensively. Osimhen, I think the expectation is, obviously from what we're hearing, it's going to be hard for him not to go to Chelsea at this point. He's a Chelsea fan. He loved Drogba. I think he's heading there. But I think with quite a few of these players, the big names, the Declan Rice, etc., Newcastle are asking the question, if don't buy a ticket, you can't win the raffle. So they are asking the question about a lot of players. And that underlines the fact that they're not operating on a £75 million budget.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah. And Inda's asking about Barella and any news around Barella. Look, I think Barella's a player that a lot of teams would like. It's just a case of whether you can get him out of Inter. If you're thinking of some of the players that are being linked to leaving Inter Milan at the moment, you've got Onana, you've got Bastoni, you've got Di Marco, you've got Lautaro Martinez, whether they keep Lukaku, you've got Barella. Like that's just 6 players off the top of my head that are being talked about leaving Inter Milan. They're not going to sell half their team that just got to the Champions League final. They don't need to have a fire sale here. Barella, undoubtedly one of the best players that I've seen in that team and would suit Liverpool or any other club like he's asking. But I'm not convinced, mate. I don't think Barella's coming to the Premier League soon.
No, I don't agree with you. I think Inter do need to sell. We know they didn't get the Milan Skriniar money, which they were banking on, but I think you'll see Onana. Maybe DeMarco's getting a real lot of push at the minute, and we saw Man City were linked. It wouldn't surprise me if Newcastle were linked after him at some point. There isn't many better left backs in Europe at the minute than DeMarco. He's playing so well. I wouldn't surprise me to see him linked. No, but Barella's one who I think is unsellable for it, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. Mark, I'm going to address your Tierney question in about 10 minutes or so because we've got another section where he is going to be addressed. Let's run through some of the other names that have been linked in the last week or so. And one of the favourite ones I've seen is Tyler Adams. Undoubtedly, Tyler Adams needs to leave Leeds. I think he might have had a small setback with his injury. I haven't checked this out properly yet, but he obviously did have a problem, didn't he, at the back end of last season. I think teams would like to be sure of where Tyler Adams is in terms of his recovery from that. But let's assume that Tyler Adams is going to be okay. He would be a great profile of player, wouldn't he, for Newcastle to go looking for?
He would. I think he's got quite a lot of the Premier League looking at him, Dean. I think in terms of the cost as well. If they're looking to bring 5 players in, they can't spend £500 million, so they can't all be £100 million players. So you can get some for 30, 40, which I think is the bracket Adams is. I think it's definitely worth looking at, and they are looking at him. I think he's appealing. His attitude's been great. He had a great World Cup, and he was fantastic for Leeds. He really, really was. I think he ticks a lot of boxes for Newcastle. It wouldn't surprise me to see him go very high up on their radar, Dean.
Yeah. Mark, you say that Tyler Adams helped Leeds go down. Why are clubs chasing him? I mean, the reason Leeds went down is because he wasn't fit. In my Tyler Adams wasn't available when they needed him, and they missed him so much, didn't they?
They did. I watch Leeds quite a lot, as you know, Dean. One
Yeah.
of my clubs up here, and when they had to rely on Rocker, McKennie to a lesser extent because he's not a number 6 like Adams is. No, they missed him. He's so good at getting around the field. I think he'd be a brilliant fit next to Bruno Guimaraes. As good as anyone who we'll be talking about in the show. Watch Tyler Adams closely. He's going to be leaving Leeds, and it'll be to another Premier League club. And a lot of clubs like him. Liverpool have been linked. United. It wouldn't surprise me to see him go to. I think he'll go top 6 somewhere. I think.
Yeah, holds great value, like you say. Harvey Barnes is next on my list. Again, another one in the same boat as Tyler Adams, whereby he's been relegated to the Championship and should not be playing that level of football, so needs a transfer. Has been linked with West Ham in the last week, and rightly so. I think it was Matt Law that did the first story on that. There's definitely legs in that story. What about it from a Newcastle point of view? Do you see much in that?
Yeah, I did a piece on Barnes a few months ago, actually, and that they were looking at him very closely. Such a good player. I don't think he gets the credit he deserves. I think Maddison's maybe took a little bit off him. But what a player. I think he's great. And Newcastle want this left-sided forward. I saw someone talking about Sam Maximin in the chat there. But Harvey Barnes, Newcastle do like him. He's on the list. I just don't think he's first choice in the minute. I think that they want that. Sorry for FIFA language. They want that cam first.
Yeah.
And then the holding midfielder, maybe the fullback after that. So I think they do want this left-sided forward. If they do a marquee signing, Dean, I think it might be this left-sided forward. And then there's a player who we didn't discuss about, but keep an eye on Ousmane Dembele as a marquee signing.
I do always forget Ousmane Dembele, to be fair. I do always forget him, and you've talked about this for a while.
They did talk to him. He came over, if you remember. He met the Sunderland chairman, and he did have contacts with Newcastle at that point. He's only got a year left at Barcelona, and Piff, he does appeal to Piff as well. He's one I'd throw in there. Keep an eye on Ousmane Dembele in this window, and especially for Newcastle, because I think they do want a marquee signing. And Eddie Howe softened his stance on this as well, hasn't he? Recent weeks, he's talked about marquee signings. I think this left forward could be the marquee signing.
Yeah, I think Ousmane Dembele is a good marquee signing because he's not a Neymar. He's not somebody that you're going to have a pile of problems with. Injuries might be the biggest problem you get with Ousmane Dembele. But look, most people in this chat play FPL and love it. I would love it, and I bet everyone in the chat would love it if Ousmane Dembele was an option for next season in FPL, because that would be, honestly, it'd be a lot of fun. Aston Villa Bozzy keeps saying he wants every player we talk about. He said he wanted Harry Maguire at Villa. Now he's saying he wants Tyler Adams at Aston Villa. He's getting very excited. And I tell you what, Villa have got, I think Newcastle are potentially the most exciting team in this transfer window. I don't think Villa are too far behind.
Not at all, especially if they get Monchi over the line, Dean, as they're in talks with Monchi now from Seville, one of the best sporting directors in the world. A lot of exciting signs coming at Villa. Tielemans caught me a bit by surprise. I thought they might even want to go someone a bit higher level, but they're very happy with their midfield unit at the minute. And I think he adds to that. I think our old friend Pau Torres might be heading to Villa, Dean, the centre half from Spain. Wonderful player. Do you know what? I think he's the sort of player, Dean, who'll come in 12 months' time. Every big club has said, why didn't we pull the trigger on Pau Torres? Because he's an absolute Rolls Royce of a player, and he'll be great for Villa. I'd be very excited by Aston Villa. I think they're going to have a very good summer.
Yeah, Tielemans caught me a surprise. If you think about Yuri Tielemans, when he wasn't signing his new contract at Leicester, and was kind of angling that he wanted a move, it was because he wanted to play Champions League football and he felt he should be at that level and probably wanted more money as well. And by joining Aston Villa, he's not getting Champions League football, and he's probably not on that dissimilar contract to what Leicester could have offered him back then. Obviously, they've been relegated, but I think if you'd have had Tielemans like fully motivated, you'd have got more out of him as well. So a bit strange for me that Tielemans has gone there, but I think Emery, obviously the big factor, as well as the fact that they have qualified for Europe. One that caught me out a little bit, mate, with Newcastle in terms of a transfer link was Kyle Walker-Peters. Do you think that's because he holds good value, or what do you think it is about him?
Do you know what? Newcastle are looking at quite a lot of these relegated players, and they just so happen to be players who they're looking at. A few Leeds players, Leicester players who we've already talked about, and Southampton. There's a few there who they liked. We've already mentioned Bella Kotchup, the young centre half, who is in the consideration. Walker-Peters is an interesting one. because he's predominantly a right back, and we know Newcastle want a new left back this summer. They want to move Dan Burn back in as the bottom cover. They've got Matt Targett there, but they want someone else there. So, would you sign Walker Peters as a first choice left back? Maybe if he was a real bargain, they might look at it, because he could do a job there. I'm not so sure, and I don't think they've got enough money swilling around to buy Walker Peters to be back up to Kieran Tierney, because Kieran Trippier, sorry, because they don't really need him. So
Yeah.
I can see why. If it was, depends how much. If it was a loan, maybe they might do it.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. We just had a few people join us. Thanks to everyone that's jumped in. I'm going to go to Balkan Mag first. He said he would love to see Palhinha from Fulham. Look, I'm a Fulham fan, mate. I don't want you going anywhere near that man. But I will concede he's one of the best defensive midfielders in this division. And I'll be very surprised if Fulham haven't had to field offers by the end of this transfer
I didn't think
window.
of him next to Bruno, Dean, actually, but two
terrible fit, mate. Terrible fit.
well, you'll be happy to seeing Tony Khan getting involved in the transfer reaction the other night. I did hear that rumor going round, and
that release clause.
Yeah, and I did say that his people were putting that around, and it came out. But I'm glad I wasn't the one who tweeted it.
Yeah. Tony Khan quick to kill that one and says there's no release clause on Palhinha. Look, Fulham bought him for about 20 million, maybe even just under that, and he's now valued at 60 million pounds. So look, they would do very well out of it, but they would also not do well out of it because Fulham are not the same team without the tenacity of Palhinha in there. But I understand, Balkamag, why you would want Palhinha at Newcastle. At the moment, I don't think there's anything in that, is there? There's no. I think he's one of the few players that hasn't been linked.
I haven't heard his, I haven't heard his name for Newcastle. You'll be glad to hear, Dean. But it does. Now I think about it, it does fit.
You'll write it tomorrow. Joachim says, I've come in late. Have you talked about Kieran Tierney? We haven't. He is in the next section of this show, so you've made good time in there. No worries at all. Sycat says, do you see Raphinha leaving and any chance that Newcastle could move for him? I don't actually think Raphinha will end up leaving. I think that he'll dig his heels in and they won't be able to get him out. I think there are a few Barca fans that would quite like him to move. But he would fit the profile, I think, wouldn't he? When you talk about a wide attacker at Newcastle, I mean, I think they were even in the conversation. Were they in the conversation before? They were at least mentioned.
Yeah, I think they were. And, we've got these 4 wide players at Barcelona, which we're looking at sellable assets. Because about Barcelona, even though they're not getting Messi, they're still trying for Gundogan, Bernardo Silva. If they're going to get him, they need to raise money. They need to get rid of some players. And it's the 4 wide players, isn't it, who were available, Dean? We spoke about Dembele already. But then there is Raphinha, but then there's Ferran Torres and Ansu Fati. I think the latter two most likely. But Raphinha, Xavi spoke about him glowingly. His agent Deco looks to be going into the club as well, which probably does help Raphinha. But yeah, if you look at Raphinha's stats, Dean, he had a very good season. Yeah. Out of those four, he was the one who really had a good season. So I think I agree with you. I think out of those 4 wide right players, he's the most less likely to go out of all of them. But I keep an eye on all of them. Ferran Torres and Ansu Fati, as we spoke about Dembele, they could all be coming to the Premier League.
Yeah, so in the last 20 minutes, Steve's just pointed out a story to me, which I hadn't seen, mainly because we were on here. But Luke Edwards of The Telegraph has written that Newcastle were preparing a bid for German international midfielder Felix Nmecha of Wolfsburg, says they've been tracking him for months. Yeah, is that anyone you've heard much about, mate? It's not personally been on my radar at all, but you might have come across it at some point.
I've seen his name. It's one who's linked. I don't know too much about him, Dean. I know he was at Man City, wasn't he? Really interesting player because we had his brother Lucas at Middlesbrough at one point on loan. So, but this is Felix, who I think is slightly better. No disrespect to Lucas, but I think Felix is slightly better. 22. I don't really, from Wolfsburg, I don't really see him. I don't see him being a starter. Is he a huge improvement on what they've got? I don't doubt it for 1 minute, but you do wonder whether this is it another youngster signing? Probably not, but it probably ticks the boxes in terms of value for them, Dean.
Yeah, I was going to say I'm going to nick a line that he's written in here. That I'm just reading it for the first time, but it's exactly that stuck out for me. It says he would be a relatively cheap signing and shows the club's desire to extract as much value for money as they can from a difficult market. Basically, people, what happens here, by the way, with Newcastle when you're reporting on them? I mean, Graham will probably know more than this than me because he's more on the patch than I am, but because of the setup and the hierarchy that's now in place at Newcastle, you've got all sorts of sources around the club, and journalists will typically be closest to one of those sides of the story. And with Newcastle, there's about 4 sides to each story at the moment, and you'll be fed a version, and depends which version you get on how hard you're going to go in terms of writing it. So a lot of the stuff that you read does have legs in it. Like there's something there, but it's trying to figure out who the most important person is to listen to. I mean, I guess it should be Dan Ashworth, shouldn't it? But I don't know if it's genuinely the Saudi owners themselves. Is it hard, mate? Do you find it hard to keep track of what you should and shouldn't believe?
It is difficult because I think that when you say there's that many different sources up here, there's 3 different ownership groups. That then you've got the manager group, you've got the sporting director, you got the chief scout as well, all with different contacts. You know, talking half a dozen different places where the story has come from somewhere genuine, and it's very hard to deny a lot of these things. I think that this is true. I think. But Nmecha, I think I still see this as more of a squad player. I really do. I don't see him getting ahead of Joe Linton, particularly. Sean Longstaff had a great end to the season. This is I think a squad signing, but a very good one because they need to really do need to improve their squad. I said this on a few shows, Dean, where I think Newcastle have got the biggest gap between their best player and their worst player. I think Bruno Guimaraes, world class. Then you got Paul Dummett, at lower Championship League One player.
I hope he's not watching.
Well, yeah, I hope not. Sorry, Paul, but that, do you know what I mean? I wouldn't take him at Middlesbrough. I don't think many Championship clubs would. So, I think that they've got that biggest gap, which again highlights the job Eddie Howe's done for this club. But yeah, I wouldn't. If I was Newcastle fans, I wouldn't get too down in the dumps about this. This won't be your biggest sign of the summer, but it's not a bad start if it does come off.
Yeah, Newcastle have completed a deal today to sign 18-year-old Gambian forward Yankuba Min-jae from Danish team Odense. He will go straight out on loan, won't he? But this is in line with, Newcastle not just looking to sign stars. And like we're talking here about a player that's relatively cheap, the Telegraph are talking about here. They've got like a 2-tiered structure or something they're going for here. Is that a good way to describe it? They're obviously going for the 5 signings that will improve their first team, but they're looking to prepare beyond that, aren't they?
Yeah. If you remember the signing Garon Kowal, the Australian, outstanding, pardon me, outstanding player. But Min-jae, he's 6 million, but he's got a lot of people looking at him going straight to Feyenoord, which sums up how good he is, Dean.
Yeah, exactly that.
Yeah, Newcastle, they really are bolstering the youth system as well. They're doing everything.
Yeah, I think it's important that they do that too, because they'll want to show that they've got big intentions for the long term here, and they'll want to give youth a chance, and I'm sure also improve their academy as part of this. Right, we're going to look to move on now. I see loads of you have asked about Scott McTominay. Loads of you have asked about Kieran Tierney. No one's asked about Neymar, but we're going to give you some information on that, and James Maddison as well. They are all coming up in our next section, which is called the Source Meter. There we go, the Source Meter, and it's Kieran Tierney first up. Listen, everyone, thank you for joining us. We've got over 100 of you in the chat right now. If some of you could give us a like, that would massively help us get in the algorithm of YouTube tonight and going forward. So please do just spare a second to give us that thumbs up as we talk about Kieran Tierney joining Newcastle. Basically, with this Source Meter, we get all sorts of source ratings. So like you're going to Nando's, basically, how hot are you willing to go? Kieran Tierney has been one of the longest probably sagas in terms of their pursuit. And I've gone for hot, mate. I've gone for a hot source on Kieran Tierney to Newcastle, just because we know there's substance to it. And I think it's realistic as well.
Yeah, I don't disagree. They do like him. He ticks a lot of Eddie Howe boxes. The type of personality he is, Dean, the type of player he is. You know he's going to fit into Newcastle like hand in a glove. Comes from Scotland. He always felt a bit homesick at us, didn't he? So going to Newcastle would be great for him. You know, and let's not forget that Brendan Rodgers was a huge fan. Leicester have gone down now, so one of the big competitors has gone as well. I like this one a lot. I think if he's available at the right price for this deal, I think it'll happen. Don't think Newcastle will pay 30 million for him though. And I think with his injury history, Arsenal might have to accept some sort of deal here. But yeah, if he is available at the right money, Newcastle will be there.
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't fit with the way Arsenal are building their team at the moment, so that does make sense that they should look to move him on. I don't think they're going to be looking to do a super cheap deal on him, but they might have to lower their expectations on the fee a little bit, just as they will expect teams like West Ham to be a bit more realistic when they're looking to sign Declan Rice. So it goes both ways, something like this. Aston Villa Bozzy says the Tierney link makes a lot of sense in a position they need to. I've heard Villa and Emery are interested. He's signed him at Arsenal. He doesn't give up, old Bozzy. He's trying to sign every player that we're talking about on this show, but with good intention. I mean, Aston Villa sign a left back every 6 months anyway, so they might as well sign another one.
Yeah, why not? They have the right backs as well. They're one of the teams who are looking at Walker Peters as well, we understand. So, yeah, I think Kieran Tierney, when it comes push to shove, he'll have quite a few looking at him. His age amazes me, Dean. He's still only 26.
Yeah.
You know, he's been around for so long. I think he played when he was 17, 18 at Celtic, didn't he? So, yeah, I think it's a bit of a risk if you take him because of his injury record. But I think he's one who, if he comes in a team, he's a 7, 8 out of 10 player every week.
Yeah, Joachim says, I like Tierney. He's old-fashioned player with black boots, short sleeves in wintertime, fast and capable in a one-on-one. Yeah, I think it's tough. He's from Scotland, like Graeme said. They're much tougher up there than we are down here in the south. I would be wearing all sorts of Under Armour, maybe some gloves, maybe even a scarf of some sort if I could. But yeah, Kieran Tierney.
You'd have the Sam Maximum look. You'd have the wrap and everything.
Mate, I wouldn't be far off that. I'm not going to lie. Big Tip says Declan Rice is being sold 100%. That is right, my friend, but he will not, I think, be going to Newcastle. So we've not got him on the source meter today. But yeah, Kieran Tierney gets a hot rating. So that is one to look out for. Let's move on to one of our next targets. We've got 4 players we're talking about in this section, and then we're going to go through some questions from you guys. Here we are. This is the one that everyone's expecting. Neymar to Newcastle. It was a rumor from a couple of months ago now. It's a story that you were all over at the time. People thought they should just laugh at this story. I don't think that anyone should really laugh at Neymar to Newcastle because I think this is the absolute epitome of what these owners are about, isn't it?
Yes, it is, and you know he's not done and dusted by any stretch of imagination. You can imagine they must have done the account staying here. Can you imagine what business in the marketing department they would do if Neymar arrived on Tyneside? It'd be staggering. And he's still a world-class performer. Let's not beat around the bush. Neymar is a world-class performer. And he tick a lot of boxes. He's got good friends at the club in Bruno and now Joe Linton. We love a Brazilian player in the Northeast. We always have. We always will. Newcastle were the very first ever team to sign a Brazilian Dean back in Mirandinha, if you remember him back in the day. I like this a lot. And I think recently these PIF rumours, we know PIF are talking to him. It's confirmed. They're looking at taking him to Saudi, maybe. But the original story was it was PIF who were interested in this. And now that's been confirmed by their talks to take him to Saudi. So we know for a fact that PIF have been talking to Neymar. Keep an eye on this one. And if there is a loan deal to be had, Dean, this is the one to test the water with it.
Absolutely, yeah. So for people who missed that part of the show, we were asked the question, like, is there a possibility here that the Saudi owners can obviously sign him for the Saudi Arabian League and a team there and then move him over to Newcastle? Now, we don't know the legalities around that yet, but I would be surprised if they don't at least explore that avenue because it's a very obvious one for them to test the Premier League by. Big Tip says Neymar is an incredible player. Whatever your opinions on his antics, he is world class. Mark Nash says world-class performer who has never influenced any team to perform as trophy winners. That is a hot take from Mark. I'm not sure that is entirely true. But I'm very mixed on Neymar because he's just wound me up throughout his career. Like the tantrums in between the moments of brilliance, I just found very hard to
I
handle.
thought I recognised you there. I did see you outside his house in Paris protesting. I thought I saw you.
I just think, like, apparently he's not that hard to manage as people imagine. And I think his character references are actually better than you might imagine. But it just comes across as the player that really could, yeah, like shake a dressing room.
It's like that. Again, coming back to the City comparison thing, it would be that Robinho signing, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that's it. It's a massive gamble, but you know, Piff, if you give them a choice out of signing somebody who's not got a sexy name, or you give them Neymar, they're going to want Neymar because
as much as we like Harvey Barnes, if Pippa sat there in the boardroom with these two on the table, saying which one are we going to take, we know which one they're picking.
Yeah, Harvey Barnes has not got a chance when it comes to that one. Haley says, what would his wages be? I guess that is one limit on this. Like Newcastle are being a little bit careful, and obviously Bruno Guimaraes, well, his contract talk seems to have been going on for a few months now, but that's going to be an issue too, because Bruno needs to be obviously basically the top earner. If Neymar comes through the door, I don't know what we'd be talking, but you would imagine his expectation would be like 500 grand a week based on what players of his
again, that's why the loan
possible.
That's why the possible loan comes in, isn't it? No tax being paid in Saudi. If Piff are paying him in Saudi, look, I bet there's a lot of avenues to look at here. If he's getting his wages in Saudi, then who knows what they can do.
Yeah, that's true. Bozzy says, imagine Dan Burn and Neymar linking up down the left. Neymar would be absolutely fuming. That is a combination we 100% need to see. Mark says, doesn't he always take time off for Carnival? Look, Newcastle probably let him do that if he's been able to influence their
He wanted to go to Rio. He's got the pig market, hasn't he? He's got Newcastle nightlife. He'll love it.
Yeah, Newcastle underrated for sure. But yeah, Neymar getting a medium rating, not because it's not true that they like him, but just how complicated it probably is going to be to actually pull off that transfer. But as Graeme says, do not totally rule that one out. Right, let's move on to target number 3 on the source meter. And we have got the mighty Scott McTominay. And loads of you have asked about McTominay since we started this stream today. In the comments, what about McTominay? What about McTominay? I think Scott McTominay to Newcastle is absolutely the perfect match. Like Scott McTominay, if he doesn't fit in with what Man United are doing right now, but he wants a good level club, and he deserves a good level club. Like he's been at Man United his whole life. He's worked hard. He's does brilliant work to allow others to be themselves. Yeah, listen to that alarm. Extra hot. Scott McTominay to Newcastle is extra hot because this should happen. 26 years old, sits at the base of that midfield, does the dog's work for players like Bruno. I really can see this one coming off. What do you think?
I can totally. It's a player who Eddie Howe loves, Dan Ashworth loves. They've done the homework on him. They try to get him in January, as we know, which tells us everything, really, Dean. And yeah, it makes all the sense in the world to me. I know some Newcastle fans are a little bit negative about him. There is that impression that he's just not good enough, but he's a top class operator, and put him next to Bruno, I think it would be a very, very interesting partnership and a very good one. You're going to get your money's worth out of this player. You really are, and it is an improvement on what you have. I know some Newcastle fans don't think he's a big improvement on Sean Longstaff, but let me guarantee you, he is. He is a big improvement on Sean Longstaff. This is a guy who's played God knows how many games for Manchester United. He's a good player. I think it's someone who Erik ten Hag probably ideally, Dean, wouldn't like to let go, but with their squad issues, I think they have to. But I think I bet he sings his praises when he does leave. He'll give him a glowing reference as well.
Yeah, I don't know if it's because the expectation levels are higher now or why Newcastle fans especially not wanting him. But Balkan Mag says, hope we don't bring him in. Mark says he's bang average. Big tips, one Bruno to another Bruno. Yeah, basically that. But yeah, I think that McTominay gets a really hard deal off people. If you think that Scott McTominay and Harry Maguire, if you could sign that combination, you'd be getting such a better deal than you realize. Like, I genuinely think if someone pulled off those two signings at the same time, people on the internet and Twitter would be trolling and laughing at it. I actually think that would be a really, really good get for someone. And I know Newcastle have bigger aspirations, but you have to have foundations to the beautiful things you're looking to build. And that's what players like McTominay are going to give you. They'll do the work that others don't want to do. They've been around the Premier League. They know what it takes. He's one of the fittest players at Man United, Scott McTominay. And yeah, as you say, I think Eddie Howe would love him.
Yeah, totally. And they won't have it all their own way. We know there's a lot of clubs looking at him. I heard Brighton, which if they lose Caicedo would be a great fit. I don't think they'll have their own way in getting him, but I think if they really do push, they will get him, Dean, because that's Champions League football. But yeah, I think he'd be a brilliant fit for them.
Yeah, a regular's just jumped in. Resting Pilgrim. Hello, mate. He says Newcastle need players like McTominay who can step in for European games. That is true. That European nous is something that Newcastle don't yet have as a team. So you need to bring in players that understand not just the games themselves, but like the scheduling around it and what your life starts to
He
look
won't
like.
be nervous. Imagine Scott McTominay on that big Wednesday night at St James's. He's had that at Old Trafford. He's not going to be nervous by that. Yeah.
Just another game.
Exactly.
Pete Channel says, Maguire and Scott McTominay, they do not want Newcastle to progress at all. Honestly, I just think that these guys just get such a hard time with things. That maybe it happens and I'm wrong, but I think they would be two really good squad signings that add depth. NUFC Luke said he's crap, would never want him at the Toon. Luke, I'm sure you've seen a lot worse players than Scott McTominay come into your football club. Come on, don't get too carried away here. Yes, you're Champions League now, but only just, and you've still got a lot of work to do to establish yourselves in that competition. These are the steps you have to take. Like Newcastle have elevated themselves into the position very quickly. I'm very interested, Luke, and any other Newcastle fans in here. Tell me who you think would be the perfect player for that role. I'm really interested to see who you think would be the perfect profile of player for Newcastle in a Scott McTominay role that isn't Scott McTominay, but is also gettable. So let me know exactly what you think. But yeah, we've gone extra hot for Scott McTominay to Newcastle. And seeing as it's rattled so many people, I quite want it to happen now. Poor old Scott McTominay. Feel sorry for him. Let's move on. I'm still going to look out for your comment, Luke, to see who you would like at Newcastle, because I genuinely think there are not that many better options for how much he's going to cost. Here we go. James Maddison to Newcastle. This is the fourth and final one on the source meter before we get on to other questions. Mark Nash says Palhinha, the defensive midfielder. Yeah, I don't want to hear about that.
You planted that seed now. You've really have.
Yeah. Matty says they should take Fred too. Then they need the McFred combination. Mate, I don't think that's that bad an idea.
There's your Paulinho replacement, Dean. Fred.
Yeah, we'll move on. James Maddison is getting a hot rating for us to join Newcastle United this summer. I'll be completely honest with you. I think Tottenham have the jump on Newcastle here. I think that Tottenham are slightly ahead of them. I think in terms of the lines of communication that are opening here to get a deal done for James Maddison, the people that will be doing the deal, I think that Tottenham probably got better connections here. And in terms of status, I know that Newcastle have the European football right now, have the top four finish. Tottenham still as big a club, I'm afraid, probably. I'm not going to say a bigger club than Newcastle. I'm not going to go there right now. But in terms of how a player would perceive it, it's not like they need to go to Newcastle ahead of Tottenham. But James Maddison, obviously, 100% a target for this summer window. This is going to be a real battle, mate, to get James Maddison, especially as you're getting him at reasonable value. Do they want 50 million-ish, I think, Leicester?
I think they want more than that, Dean. I think
is it 50 to 60? Is it?
Yeah, it's 55 to 60 that they're asking for.
60, yeah.
And Newcastle value him at 40 because he's only got. Newcastle did bid close to 50 for him last summer.
Oh,
he's only got a year left now, and from what I'm hearing from Newcastle, they won't go much above 40, Dean. And I agree with you. I think Tottenham are in pole position here. I think as long as Maddison likes Ange Postecoglou and wants to play Ange ball at Tottenham, I make them favourites at this point. I really do. I think that they will pay more than they won't pay more than Newcastle. They'll pay more than Newcastle are willing to pay. If Newcastle won't go to 50, 55, they're not going to get him.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because Newcastle, technically speaking, could go £60 million on this and they'll be all right, surely. And they've wanted Maddison for a while.
It's not a clause deal, neither is it? It's not a clause deal.
No, it's purely a valuation. And I guess it depends how quick this happens. But Leicester, we've seen happen a few times now, very good at holding out for what they think a player is worth. And you usually end up having to pay it. So I think the best thing here will be for Tottenham or Newcastle to accept that this is the valuation and get round to actually trying to negotiate. Because whoever holds back on it basically isn't going to get the player. If he did join Newcastle, what kind of role do you see James Maddison having within the setup?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because he plays a 4-3-3. It'd be in the midfield, but further on. I think he wants two midfielders in there next to Bruno, so number 6 and number 10. Probably similar how you'll see United line up. So he would be taking the Bruno Fernandes role, very similar to how Manchester United line up for people to compare it to. And so I think, because what Newcastle had an issue with it sometimes, Dean, in the season, it was the ability to unlock teams. Teams especially came to St James's Park and started parking the bus. We actually saw it in the first game of the season when Fabian Schär smashed in a shot from 25 yards against Nottingham Forest. It was there all season, that lingering. If Bruno wasn't doing something, they did struggle. Almiron had a very good season, tailed off towards the end where he unlocked a few. Sam Maximum didn't do his job. But Maddison is that one where he can come in and he can supply the ammunition for whoever's on the left, but Alexander Isak. They do need this sort of player. And Eddie Howe knows it. They've been looking at him since last summer.
Yeah, Luke got back to us. He said he'd like to see Kimmich at Newcastle. Joshua Kimmich's literally like the best player of that position in the world. Luke, I love in your ambition. Maybe
he might see him at St James's next season though. For someone
might
else.
see him there. Yeah, he won't be wearing a Newcastle shirt.
No.
But yeah, I do like it, Luke. I mean, absolutely, your head is where it should be because you're on the same page as Piff, I think. So get carried away. Why not? Bozzy says that Maddison would be about the same valuation as Mason Mount, probably cheaper, to be fair. Who would you take out of the two? I'm
not Maddison. What? You take Mount?
Yeah.
Oh, Dean. See, this is the Southern bias. If everyone's watching, this is Southern bias coming here. James Maddison is all day long the player you would take here. He offers more in the latter third. It's where he wants to be. I don't mind him as a player, Dean, but I think it's just a bit meh. What does he do? Is he a good number 8? I'm not so sure. I quite like him at wide at times, but James Maddison over Mason Mount every day of the week.
I knew I'd rattle you at some point. Haley says, how did Maddison get 10 goals and 9 assists? He trolled me all season. Haley is an avid FPL player. And I think she was quite loyal to James Maddison throughout last season. I think he lost his head a little bit, didn't he? He went off the boil a bit. He was loyal to Leicester and he was obviously loyal to Brendan Rodgers too. They had a pretty close connection. But yeah, he didn't have a consistent season, but it's a tough one for him because he knew that whatever was going to happen, he wouldn't be playing in the Championship next season and he won't be playing in the Championship next season. So, Haley, you might have James Maddison back in your FPL team next season. And why not? Because he'll play him probably for either Tottenham or Newcastle. Maybe even, you never know, Man United or someone might go for him if those two can't sort out a deal.
It's strange that one of the top four, established top four, aren't really sniffing at him, Dean, isn't it? It's a little bit strange that when you're seeing Tottenham and Newcastle for him.
Yeah, I agree, and it's strange because formerly, when he was not available, Man United were being linked, Man City were being linked. They seem to have gone away a bit now. CH is in the chat. CH is a loyal viewer of this show. Hello, CH. Good to see you again. Welcome to the summer transfer madness. Thanks to everyone that is staying with us. We've got about 5 minutes or so left, and we're going to get through as many questions as we can. So if you're a Newcastle fan, if you're not a Newcastle fan, we're just going to rattle through some questions as they come in now. How are Newcastle going to use Isak next season? Through the middle or on the wide, mate? What do you think will be the best use?
I think he's going down the middle now. I think he did a good job on the left with Callum Wilson. Wilson's an interesting one to keep an eye on, guys. Good chance that he leaves this summer, Callum Wilson. They may look at a centre forward as well. But I think with this left forward they're looking at, Isak will be down the middle. And what a player he is. He could have a massive season next year.
Yeah, indeed. Resting Pilgrim, for all the money Newcastle will spend, it seems silly not to just spend the extra £10 million and make sure you get James Maddison on a 4-year contract. I mean, that is logic, surely.
It is. I think we're both nod down heads, Dean. We don't disagree with that in the slightest.
Yeah, absolutely. There, Mark thinks Maddison is just a notch below Champions League standard. I'm not sure that I agree with that, but entitled to your view. Oh, it's a good question from Haley. What's happened to Saint Maximin? Now, this is definitely an interesting one, and well, I think and you think he's on his way out, don't we?
Yeah, he was disappointing last season. The thing with Newcastle fans is they're on a different level now. When they were struggling at the bottom of the Premier League, Dean, he was the shining light in that Steve Bruce team, which was a load of you know what. He was the real diamond in the rough. But now he's just not good enough. He's really not good enough. His attitude isn't. He's not an Eddie Howe player either, Dean. The way he doesn't chase back, he doesn't work hard enough. Look at his assist rates, and it's not good enough. I don't imagine many of our FPL viewers had him in their team. If you did, I feel sorry for you because you wouldn't have scored you many points. I think he might actually be one who PIF consider taking from one pocket and putting him in another, moving him to Saudi.
Yeah, absolutely. Torben says there's a solid rumour for a top talent coming from Gambia to Newcastle. Min-jae plays for Odense in Denmark. Yeah, it's been announced today, Torben. He is joining Newcastle. Graeme had actually done that story a few weeks ago. I messaged him before the show. I said, do you know anything about this? And he'd written it on June the 2nd. So there you go. We've got a proper real life ICK on our hands here. He's going straight out on loan, and you will probably see him at Newcastle in a couple of years if he lives up to the hype. Here's a good question from Luke. Do you think that Kim is more likely to join Newcastle than Man United?
It's really interesting because we said about the Harry Maguire domino, didn't we, earlier in the show, Dean? I think that's why United are hesitating a little bit. If people don't know that Kim has a clause in his contract switching for the first 2 weeks in July, lets him move for just 45 million. Although I've been told by certain clubs that even a 45 million hit by paying a full clause is quite a big hit in for FFP. That's why we understand United are probably trying to do a deal with Napoli. Not never an easy thing, but trying to pay slightly more than his release clause. He would tick the box for Newcastle. They want a right-sided centre-back. He's one of the best defenders in Europe. It wouldn't shock me massively if it did that, but I think Man United are favourites if he does leave. I think it's a big if still, Dean. But it wouldn't surprise me if Newcastle had a sniff.
Yeah, absolutely. Dave says, how far do you guys think Newcastle will go in the Champions League next season?
Well, I did see they're going to be in pot 4, aren't they? I did see that. I read that on somewhere.
It's going to be tough.
It all comes down to draw, doesn't it? You know,
Yeah.
I tell you what though, from those first few pots, nobody will want to go to St James's Park on a Wednesday night. Then the atmosphere there, it's like going to Celtic or Rangers, isn't it? You know, they're very good in Europe, and so I think Newcastle will enjoy it. Yeah, it totally depends on the draw. It totally depends. I think they'll have a chance, but it just depends on the draw.
Yeah, and this is also another reason, you know, these caliber of signings that they need to make, some of them have to have that pedigree of playing Champions League football. They have to be able to handle the occasion. Players like Scott McTominay are going to be so important for Newcastle next season. Sorry, Luke. Just winding you up, mate. Shirt sales will boom in Asia. Kim Min-jae. Yeah, they will. I mean, obviously, this is another part of the strategy for Newcastle. They obviously want big stars from around the world. It's not going to be the priority reason as to signing players, but of course they want marketability here too.
It is, but obviously Newcastle are trying to put across that story, not paying the biggest wages in town either. Mm-hmm. So unless you are paying Kim huge money, no offense to Newcastle, he's not going to turn down Manchester United to come to Newcastle. So he's got to have a reason to leave Napoli as well. I think there's a bit of a snob effect in England where you think someone plays for Napoli and you think automatically he's going to leave there to come to the Premier League. That's not automatic, especially the way Napoli are going. So keep an eye on Kim. Yeah, it'd be interesting. But I think Newcastle will have to up their pay scale somewhat. But I think there are plans to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. The last question before we sign off for the night, guys. Rest in Pilgrim. Do you think Newcastle will suffer with not having a top scouting team in place? A bit harsh. Brighton, for instance, seem to have a good setup for finding the right players. I mean, it's just a different scouting system, isn't it?
I think that actually, if you have a look, I haven't done too many stories on it. They've really put in place a whole new scouting structure. I think there's someone coming from Leicester, but Steve Nixon, the chief scout's always been there, so the structure isn't too bad. I'm amazed that they don't have more youngsters coming through at times at Newcastle, so I think they're putting all that in place. But yeah, but now we talk about the Brighton thing in terms. Eddie Howe, I think, would rather have the De Zerbi problem of buying players cheaply, bring them in. He's a Champions League team now with the richest owners in the league. They can't operate like Brighton, Dean. That's just not the way it is it? You know, he's got to sign these big players, and but I think he'd prefer that level, Dean, where he was bringing these youngsters in, maybe losing them to other teams, but Newcastle are rubbing shoulders with the biggest teams in the world now, and that's where they are.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks for your time tonight, mate. That has been a really good run through on everything Newcastle. And thanks everyone that has joined us throughout the chat in the comments. If you're watching this on playback, feel free to make comments below on who you think we should talk about in the rest of the window. We'll be doing some general shows as well as team-specific ones. Maybe even some player-specific ones if the right transfer starts to break. The transfer window is opening officially this week. I know it feels a bit pointless because it's basically already open and players are signing for people. I'm not sure what exists. But it is the case that the transfer window is officially opening at the end of this week. So, yeah, we're ready to go. Leave your comments in there. We'll get back to you on which shows we'll be doing and when they're going live. Get your notifications on. Remember to press the alarm bell so that you don't miss a show next time we go live. And also make sure you're tuned in to Graham's Twitter page and mine as well. Thanks to all of you for watching tonight. And we'll be back soon here on Chasing the Transfer.